So with that, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Aunshul Rege. I always get it wrong. Director of the Temple University Care Lab. She is an associate professor with the Department of Criminal Justice at Temple University. She holds a PhD and an MA in criminal justice, an MA and BA in criminology, a bachelor's of science in computer science, and she has been researching proactive security in the context of cyber crimes against critical infrastructures for over 10 years. Specifically, her National Science Foundation funded Career CPS and Eager research examines adversarial and defender behavior, decision making, adaptation, modus operandi, and group dynamics. More recently, she started researching social engineering, which is the psychological manipulation of individuals to start and maintain cyber attacks. Let me introduce Dr. Rege.
Hi, Eric. I'm very excited to be here.
How are you doing this morning?
I'm good. I'm pumped and I'm ready to go.
Let's do this. All right. Well, the stage is yours. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks. All right. And perfect. So
And you're all ready.
all set. Great. Thank you so much. So, hi, everyone. As Eric introduced me just a few seconds ago, my name is Aunshul Rege, Associate Professor with the Department of Criminal Justice, where I direct the CARE Lab. CARE stands for Cybersecurity and Application Research and Education. I really want to thank Raíces for giving me the platform and opportunity to share my thoughts on diversity, equity, and inclusion in cybersecurity education with you all today. So I've introduced myself, but I really want to introduce the rest of my team. My two wonderful PhD students, Katora Williams and Rachel Blyman. To give you a little bit of context, Eric already mentioned this, but we really look at the human and socio-behavioral aspects of cyber attacks and cybersecurity, and we apply this lens to examine various topics like critical infrastructure, ransomware, social engineering, privacy, surveillance, mis and disinformation, and cybersecurity education. I also want to mention that all of our research projects have been funded by the National Science Foundation. So that's a little bit about who we are and what we do. Specifically today, I'm going to talk about cybersecurity education because I am an educator. And we're part of the folks that are responsible, right, for creating that next generation workforce that the industry needs, that the government needs, and so on and so forth. And I'm sure we're all familiar with the workforce shortage that's happening in cybersecurity, right? So the global cybersecurity workforce shortage is projected to be about 2.7 million, right? We need more workers in this space just within the US. We have about 377,000 unfilled cyber jobs across the country. And this is from the ISC Square Cybersecurity Workforce Study for 2021. Specifically in the government sector, there's a shortage of about 36,000 cybersecurity workforce employees. So, in addition to this shortage, we've got a couple of other factors that compound this problem, right? One is that we have a homogenous workforce. And I'm sure many of you have seen this image. Eric started us off with this today in his opening ceremony. But this is troubling, right? The estimates of cybersecurity workers who self-identify as Hispanic or Latino, only 4%. Black or African American, 9%. Asians, 8%. Native American, just 1%. In terms from the same sort of study, and the source is available here at the bottom of the bar chart, but women, 24% of the cybersecurity workforce. So we've got all these numbers here that we can see, but the question becomes is why should we care, right? Why does it matter to have heterogeneity? And by that I mean gender, race, ethnicity. A diverse workforce is going to yield more innovative thinking and solutions to problems that weave different perspectives. And this is going to help us better identify and confront emerging threats. A diverse workforce can understand the global threat landscape, comprehend how different attacks affect different communities and cultures, and have a say in designing effective solutions that cater to these communities. Our adversaries aren't homogenous, so our workforce shouldn't be either. And I really like this quote, right, from US Congresswoman Underwood. And if we don't have diversity in our workforce, this is going to prevent the government and private companies from recruiting from the best and widest possible pool of talent. And that's what we need if we want to design holistic solutions that are effective. In addition to this factor of diversity in terms of gender and race, we also have another compounding factor, which is the current cybersecurity investment that's happening in education or even in the industry and government is predominantly technical. Right? We see a lot of ads, all the job descriptions heavily relying on computer and information science and engineering, but cyber isn't just technical. And we just heard that from our keynote speaker today, right? It's also social. There's many aspects of this, right? Be it adversarial mindsets. How do they plan? How do they engage in divisions of labor? Understanding everyday user behavior, right? Convincing users to engage in best practices, designing effective training and awareness programs, developing good research and policy. So there's a lot of social aspects to this. And of course, increasingly, cyber criminals are relying on non-technical approaches in their attacks, and one of which is social engineering, which Eric mentioned when he introduced me, is something that I'm increasingly getting interested in. So I'm sure many of you already know what social engineering is, right? But I'm going to use the definition put forth by Chris Hadnagy, which is any act that influences a person to take an action that may or may not be in his or her best interests. And sure enough, right, we've got numbers now that are coming out that show that social engineering is so important. So 70% of US organizations experienced social engineering attacks in 2017. The financial loss stemming from social engineering through business email compromise, phishing scams, romance scams, and so on was approximated to be about 2.23 billion in 2019. So here again, I want to look at diversity in a slightly different way, right? Which is a different perspective when we're talking about cybersecurity, right? A non-technical perspective. And again, this is not exhaustive. There are many, many, many different perspectives, but I'm a social scientist, so I'm going to talk about the social here today. So if we really want to be able to tackle social engineering, right, again, we need a diverse perspective and a different set of skills if we are to generate beneficial, innovative, and holistic cybersecurity solutions against adaptive and intelligent adversaries in an ever-changing threat landscape. So diversity, again, means many different things. It's those traditional notions that we've heard of, but it's also, again, different ways of thinking about cybersecurity. So I'm going to go back into this report here that, again, ISC Square pulled out in their 2021 cybersecurity workforce study. And I really like this graph because this is what their study revealed on what is industry doing, right? What are organizations doing in terms of making investments in people to address the workforce gap. So some of the stuff that they're doing, investing in training and certifications, right? Making sure there's flexible working conditions, looking at pay and promotion related issues, but also getting into diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And so this always makes me wonder, well, what are we doing in the education space if we're part of that pipeline that feeds into this workforce? And, what can or should higher ed institutions be doing? So I'm, moving from here on. This is a giant disclaimer. These are more my efforts, my team's efforts, right? The lab's efforts towards diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the way that we're trying to really look at this is through this new NSF cybersecurity education grant that I received that started just this February. But how do we promote DEI? And the reason why I want to talk about this, hopefully, is that it helps start the conversation, maybe sustain the conversation. Maybe it'll help somebody else figure stuff out, right? Because I'm figuring this out for myself. Clearly, I've got a long ways to go. So this is not by any means a complete study. These are more anecdotes. And I'm learning as I go through this. This is a little bit of personal growth, and it forces me as an educator to think about how to literally bake DEI into all aspects of my education and research efforts. And I can tell you up front right now, this is not easy to do. So if this is what the industry is doing, or this is what organizations are doing, I am looking at, well, where do our efforts lie, right, in this? And these are the three areas that I think we are, as an educational institution, as a lab, right, in terms of the work that we're doing, we are investing in training through this education grant, which focuses on social engineering. We're offering competitions, social engineering competitions for students so that they can try their hand at this. But we're also doing workshops for educators so they can learn about social engineering and think about, implementing this in their own classrooms. So it's training educators and students. We really are investing in diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that through both of these channels, right, for educators and students, and definitely encouraging women and minorities to pursue, well, in this case, social engineering, right, a component of cybersecurity. So what are we doing in terms of diversity? One of the first steps is outreach. And doing effective outreach is knowing who you should reach out to. And so we created a list of organizations we love, abbreviated OWL. And it's a list of 228 organizations that strive to make cybersecurity and STEM opportunities and experiences accessible to underrepresented groups. So currently, we have identified 93 organizations that cater to women, 41 for the Black and African American communities, 9 for Native American, 14 for Latinx and Hispanic, 11 for Asian, 14 for the LGBTQIA plus community, and 46 for youth. So if you remember that chart that I shared with you earlier, right? I'm happy to say that we've identified at least 4 of the organizations that we can see in this chart, right? And we've made this list public. We pretty much created it at the beginning of the year. We released it in March 2021. And I'm happy to say that to date, it has been accessed over 18,000 times. So it's good to see that this is a useful resource. And if you're interested, you can go to our website, and that's the link for it. But the bottom line here is, here's the list of groups, right? Here's the list of organizations, right? Go reach out and start working with them. That's the idea. So that's almost step 1. And we actually did, right? We reached out to all of these organizations and we said, hey, we've got these competitions. We have these educator workshops. Could you please help spread the word? And we then wanted to see, well, did this work, right? How effective are we in terms of our outreach efforts to get more diversity in both the competitions and for our educator workshops? And we wanted to really measure this information. So we asked the participants to share their race and ethnicity and gender information with us, but we also made this optional to ensure, in this case, students felt comfortable sharing this information. So these are just some numbers from the summer social engineering competition that we had. In terms of gender, 59% male, 39% female, 2% non-binary. In terms of ethnicity composition, only 4% Hispanic, Latino. 27% chose not to disclose. 69% were not Hispanic, Latino. And in terms of race composition, well, I'll let you read the numbers, right, on the graph. So that's one of the biggest things for us is measuring this, because unless we if we don't do that, we're not going to know where we stand and how we can, do a better job with perhaps outreach moving forward. But remember that this is just one aspect of diversity, right? The other one that I talked about was a different perspective. So we asked the students, why are you competing in social engineering, right? And I love two of these quotes. I'm going to read them out for you. Partaking in this competition was a great experience for me and my team. For the most part, we were exposed to another aspect of cybersecurity that is not normally covered in the classes or in workplaces. So, it's quite a learning curve, right? And this other quote here, which says, it doesn't matter how much we are hardening our technical systems. If we still haven't addressed the human element, then the system will still be weak. You can learn how to do the offense. And when you learn that, you learn about the defense, and you learn that people are susceptible to social engineering, right? So again, this exposure to a different perspective, the fact that students aren't getting this kind of training in their classrooms. So they really want to learn about this, right? And be cognizant of this. So that's what we tried out in the sort of student space, but we also wanted to reach educators, and we started measuring, that aspect as well in terms of our outreach efforts for educators working. So again, we collected these metrics, but we also made it optional. So if you didn't feel comfortable disclosing that, that's completely fine. So again, in terms of gender composition, we had about 37% female, 63% males. Race composition, 25% Asian, 53% white, 19% Black and African American. But then we had very small numbers, right, for mixed race, Native Americans, and those who chose not to disclose. In terms of ethnicity composition, a little bit better than how we fared for the students, right? We had about 25% of our educators who were Hispanic and Latino. And again, this was very much targeted, outreach, and 69% not Hispanic, Latino, and 6% chose not to disclose. We asked the educators, why are you interested in a social engineering workshop? So again, that different perspective. And a different perspective take on diversity. And I really like this quote, which says, with our education system having been forced to work within a digital environment this past year, especially with the pandemic, it's evident that more awareness needs to be built in our teaching about the potholes and pitfalls of working in an online environment. So educators also recognizing the relevance of social engineering in the context of cybersecurity. So these are just some examples of, what we're trying to do in the diversity space when it comes to education, both for students and teachers. And then there's also the issue of equity. So when we were looking at the competitions, obviously, our events were hosted completely online due to the pandemic. We had pre-event surveys and post-event surveys where we asked students about, this virtual competition. And many of them identified geographic barriers as a big, big issue. So if we look at this quote down here, this was actually the first high school team that competed in our competitions. So that was kind of cool. But this quote, right? We are from a small school located in the US Virgin Islands. Since our home is just a 32 square mile patch located between the Atlantic Ocean and the Caribbean Sea, we sometimes feel isolated from national events and opportunities. By participating in this competition, we will be able to build new skills and gain experience, trying them in challenges not available to us locally. And I think this is really, really important because a lot of students, not just in the US, but internationally, reached out to us and said, hey, are we allowed to compete? Because we don't get, opportunities like this where we are. And I'm like, absolutely, right? As long as you can connect virtually, submit an application. So we really want to make our events accessible to students, not just in the US, but around the world. Expenses, right? Traveling to competitions in person is really, really expensive. I've been out to a lot of competitions across the US, and I see, and no offense to the big name schools there, but it's always the big name schools, right, that have the big budgets. What about the smaller schools, the public schools, the community colleges, right? How do we make sure that they have access to this? Are things really equitable in that regard? Um, in terms of time and flexibility, students preferred the in-person events, especially with the summer competition, because they were also doing internships or working. So it gave them the opportunity to not have to move to be able to engage in the competition. So this is access equity, which is again traditional understanding of equity. But we were also looking at equity, excuse me, in terms of everybody being able to participate because of skills. So there's a lot of technical competitions out there, but they cater only to primarily, right, technical students. And what we wanted to do is hopefully keep a level playing field for everyone, right? We've all experienced social engineering, right? We've all been phished. We get those calls about extended car warranties or fill in the blanks, right? Whatever it may be. Um, we all have experienced it. We all actually practice social engineering too. And again, social engineering on its own is not malicious, right? We all try to convince someone to do something for us in our everyday interactions. Children trying to convince their parents, can I get that ice cream, right? Or you on a job, right? You're trying to social engineer your potential employer into hiring you. You create a good impression. So these types of skills are something that are built in. This is what makes it very human. This is what makes things social and psychological, right? And so it evens off the playing field in terms of the cost to entry to compete is zero, right? It doesn't matter if you have technical skills or not. And this is what I like about these two quotes, which came from our summer competition participating teams. So one said, you don't have to have a background in computer related anything. People are people at the end of the day. Another one, cybersecurity is something that everyone can do and be aware of it. And it doesn't have to be super technical. It can be psychological and emotional manipulation. So again, this idea of making things relatable. I'm not saying being a social engineer is easy, far from that. It is very hard to do, but at least you can try your hand at it, right? So that's what we're trying to do as well in terms of skills equity. If it's relatable, that's going to draw more people in and want them to try this out. Then there's inclusion. So how do we make everyone feel welcome? So in our 2021 summer competition, this was really cool. We had our youngest team, which was a high school team. And then we also had a lot of adult learners who had worked for a couple of years and then were going back to school. And as an educator, I am of the belief that we never stop learning, right? And so this was something that was really cool that came out is we kept our open, events open and inclusive to like yeah, it doesn't matter. We actually got emails going, hey, we're actually adult learners. Can we come compete? I said, absolutely. Right. So this idea of being inclusive of everybody in terms of age, in terms of discipline, right? Are all disciplines welcomed and valued for what they bring to the table, right? So these numbers are from our inaugural social engineering competition last year. The majority of participants are still technical, as you can see, but they wanted to learn about social engineering. So if you remember that quote that I showed you earlier, right? They don't get this kind of training. But we also had some liberal arts students in there, which, you know, might suggest that they're realizing that they can contribute to cybersecurity even though they weren't technical. And this next quote um, actually gets into that a little bit more. So this is from our 2021 summer competition. So some of the benefits of non-technical skills. And this was a particular team that had 0 technical students. So one of them studied chemistry, which they thought would help them come up with scientific-based solutions if they were faced with a challenge. Somebody else studied nursing and had a minor in psychology, which they thought would help them understand how the lab employees that they were targeting, all right, how they thought. Another one was a global studies and Italians, major, and they thought that was great because that's going to help them come up with persuasive language that the lab employees that they were targeting would respond to, right? So they recognized that it was the interdisciplinary nature of the team, which was a strength. And that is a big win, right? For me as an educator, because that's showing that it's okay if you're not technical, you can still do this. So, in closing, and again, this is just personal experiences, right? This is what I've learned. Um, Remove excuses, right? Yes, we know DEI work needs to be done. So, don't just talk the talk, right? Can you also walk the walk? Are you actually investing in doing that outreach? Are you targeting students from underrepresented communities? Are you reaching out to minority serving institutions? Are you persistent with that effort? Right? Be proactive and intentional, right? Um, do the work, right? Really just do the work and start early. And this is something that you must continually engage in. Something that I think is also very, very important is listen to the communities that you plan to serve. Because, yes, diversity, again, we've got many, many different races and ethnicities, right? Genders in that bucket. So, in a certain way, yes, there are some commonalities, but they're also very unique. So, you really need to listen to their specific needs and align yourself accordingly. Develop and sustain meaningful partnerships with nonprofits, right? And this is why I love Raíces. Like, I've been having so many chats with Eric and the rest of the Raíces group because I just want to soak everything that they're saying and really learn, right? What is going to benefit the community, right? I'm not Hispanic or Latino, but listening to them and learning what their needs are important. Same thing. I'm listening to Black Girls Hack right now, right? Like, working with them and not just, making that like a token gesture. Weave them into your work. Can you design and develop something together? Can you implement it together? Can you then sit back and look at your work and evaluate it together, right? That way you learn what works, what doesn't work for the community. Mentoring and networking. I have so many students, right, that are Hispanic and Latino, but I don't know who are interested in cyber, but I don't know who to connect them with. And sometimes it helps. Like, I can try to do something, but it helps. I think it's so much more powerful when it's someone who looks like them, right? Because I'm like, hey, you did it, then maybe I can do it. And that's something that's so, so important. And to develop those networks so that you can connect students with those who are already there in industry or government or nonprofits or wherever, so that your students have someone that they can connect with. Engage in continuous measurement, evaluation, and audits. So some of the statistics, right, some of the numbers that I shared with you, this is something that we are being intentional about, and we are being very public about this, right? We're continuously measuring how did our outreach efforts work, right? And we are not designed, I'm not trained to do this, but I'm learning how to do this. Evaluation, right? Talk to students or educators after the workshop. Like, how do you think we did? Audits, right? We actually have a neutral third party who is not part of the project come and evaluate us, right? So are we on the right track? Where do we need to focus more? What can we do better? And the last thing I want to leave you all with is this idea that diversity, equity, and inclusion is not static. It is going to change, it is going to look different every single time you work towards something, right? So, if possible, work with a DEI specialist. I'm not a DEI specialist, I'm a social scientist, I'm an educator, right? But I'm trying to do the best that I can. But if you can, work with someone who is trained in this space and bring them into the conversation so that they can help you out. So that's everything that I have for you all. And I hope you found this talk useful. If you want to reach out to me or my lab, our information is here on the screen. If you have any feedback for me and my team, we would love to hear it because we're learning. And DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, cybersecurity education is very, very important to us. So we really do welcome your insights. And I want to thank Raíces once again for giving me the platform to share our work. And I'm looking forward to the rest of this conference, and it's going to be fantastic. So yeah, that's everything I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here. One thing for you is, are there any of the social engineering capture the flags coming up soon?
Yep, we've got one in the summer that's going to be coming up. And then we have our usual collegiate one that happens every October. The October one is open only to undergraduate students, but the summer one is open to high school undergrads and grads. And the really cool thing is, well, for just this past one, not only was it funded by the National Science Foundation, but we also got Google and Duo Security to financially sponsor us. We also had representatives from Google, from Department of Homeland Security, from cyberattack, actually come engage with the students during the live competition, right? So it's really awesome. And with the collegiate competition that happens every October, we actually bring in professional social engineering judges, many of whom are Black Badge winners, right, at DEF CON. DEF CON's social engineering CTF, right? They serve as judges, so they engage with the students. We worked with another nonprofit, right, the Layer 8 conference, and to really sort of co-organize this event. So we're really trying to bring in industry, government, and nonprofit and develop that nexus to give students the best quality product.
Wonderful. And with you here, I'd also like to announce that we are starting the development of Raices Kids, the K through 12 cybersecurity education program that Raíces is going to be working, and we hope to work with you guys at Temple Care Lab to develop the program. So
Oh, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. You know, Eric, you and I have been talking about this for a while. So,
yes.
yes.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being here. We really appreciate your support.
And thank you for having me.
Bye bye.